I'm really excited about today's video because I'm going to give you a tour of my first tiny sketchbook. And along the way, I'm going to explain how this little book and this little palette have changed my life. This is a little wooden tiny palette made by a company called Go Draw. I first purchased it in February 2022, and I filled it with 8 of my favorite colors. The top 6 are the 6 Essentials from Daniel Smith, and the bottom 2 are transparent red oxide and transparent yellow oxide. And all of the paintings that you're going to see were created with these 8 colors and with the supplies that you see here. And I have a video all about my tiny painting supplies as well as about different tiny palettes, and I'll link that in the description. The sketchbook came with the Go Draw palette. It's made by a company called Inkberry, and they're sold at the Go Draw website. In fact, if you buy one of the tiny palettes, it comes with a tiny sketchbook. And the thing that I really love about this sketchbook is that it's so beautifully made. And it has a nice little elastic to hold your pages together so that they don't shift or rub against one another. And the paper is a cotton blend. It has beautiful end papers, and it's a cold press paper that's a 50% cotton blend, which makes the painting experience really ideal. So I got this palette in February 2022 after seeing it online, and I took it out for my first painting adventure. And I filmed every painting adventure that I've done since then. So every one of these paintings that you're going to see has a corresponding short video. So what I'm going to do is a bit of a split screen where I'll put the video over here as I'm showing you each painting and telling you a little bit about it. This was my first painting. It was done on the 16th of February 2022. And nothing really went right because this palette came with a little clip and I had forgotten the clip. But I had one of these little chip clips in my car, so I just thought, all right, I'll use that. And I liked it so much that I've continued to use these clips for all of my tiny paintings. I also didn't really have a great way to film, so I ended up just using the hood of my sweatshirt for this first little painting. It was done outside of an arts center in Bovey Tracy, Devon, and there's a little river that runs behind it. It was a really stormy day, and I loved the way that the light came through these trees in the distance. And I had so much fun doing it that I was instantly addicted. Before getting involved with these tiny paintings, I was doing a lot of oil painting. So all of the plein air painting that I did was usually on a larger scale. And I was really devoting my energies to that, to larger oil paintings on location. And something about these little gems just kind of took over my heart and my art practice. I waited about a month, and on the 9th of March 2022, I had an eye doctor appointment, and they dilated my eyes, and I had to wait a few hours before I could drive home. So this is in Taunton, Somerset, and this is the River Tone. And I found a nice little spot with some ducks, and I was able to feed them some birdseed that I got at the grocery store and have a lovely little experience. The challenges with this one for me was trying to get the river to look like a river. I was still pretty new at painting on a smaller format. In fact, you can see the ducks don't really look that detailed. They're more of just little suggestions of ducks, but I did want to put them in, so I plopped them in at the last minute. And I waited another month and painted this one on an early winter morning. Well, I suppose technically it was early spring. I was there to collect my daughter from university, and I had intended to paint the evening before, but it just got too dark. So I woke up super early, went outside. It was so cold that the mist was just rising everywhere. And I wanted to catch the sunrise as it streamed through these trees. I don't think this one was too successful. In fact, I felt really disappointed after this one, especially after the success of the first painting. And I think because it didn't go that well, I waited almost 2 months before I painted this next one. And this was outside of Bridgewater in Somerset. I was at a little farmer's market, and this view across the road looked so enchanting that I wanted to try to capture it. And again, I was frustrated with this one. It didn't go the way I wanted. I was still very much learning how to paint on a smaller format. But I did like some of the colors, especially the reddish color of the field. About a month later, on the 19th of June, I went up to our little secret garden behind our house. We call it our secret garden because it's up behind our house. In fact, the garden is higher in elevation than our actual house, and it's accessed through a Victorian stone staircase. And at the very top, my husband and his nephew built this little tiny cabin that I call our tiny house. And I have a little studio in there as well where I like to paint sometimes. And I think this was the first painting that I was really pleased with and felt like I was starting to get somewhere with the material and learning how best to format everything and approach it. A few weeks later, I left for holiday to the US to visit family, and we visited this little pebble beach up in Door County, Wisconsin, which is this idyllic little place in northeastern Wisconsin. And I was raised going up there, and I lived up there for a little while as well. So I was with my entire family, my mother, my brother, my niece, and both of my kids. And I stole a few moments to do this little painting. And a few things went awry. One of the colors actually fell out of my palette onto the beach and I couldn't find it. And I had forgotten to bring a scarf or any kind of a tripod. So for a good portion of it, my niece was actually holding the camera. And this was the painting that changed everything for me because this painting went wildly viral. In fact, before this painting, I really only had a little bit of a following on TikTok. On all of my other social media platforms, I only had maybe a few hundred people. But this one went viral in a way that really gained me a following. And so when I say this little sketchbook and these tiny paintings changed my life, I really mean it. And it also got me more excited about painting tiny because I saw the way that people responded to the tiny paintings. I'm still not exactly sure what it is about them that people connect to so much, but I've had viral videos with my tiny paintings on every platform since this one. So on the 23rd of July, I was visiting my son in Madison, and this was at a park near his house. So again, I went for a little walk and I painted this little cherry tree. And I found it challenging to get the vibrancy of colors. There were some flowers here along the lake. And so that's something that I noted that I wanted to work on in future paintings. And just a few days later, I was sitting in my mother's garden and I painted this gazebo that my father built for my mother over 40 years ago. In fact, I think maybe 45 years ago. And it's extra special because my father died when I was 16 and my mother was only in her early 40s. But this little gazebo that he lovingly built from scratch for her lives on, as do the daylilies that he planted around it. They come out every year and my mother feels like it's an anniversary gift from my father to her. I would like to paint this one again someday. I'm not 100% happy. I really wrestled with the perspective on this one on such a tiny format, and also, again, getting things to look as vibrant as I wanted them to. So almost a month later, when I was back in England, I was at a little town called Totnes, which is near where I live. And I parked my car in a car park and I painted this little building, which is a Masonic temple. And I loved the way the hills looked in the background and the way the sky was stormy. I loved the array of different colors with the orange bricks against the greens and the blues of the hills and the sky. And this video was also hugely popular online. And I think it was with this video that I started to build a following on Instagram as well. But you can see here I was also learning a little bit more about placing an interesting composition on this square format and a tiny frame, and making sure that I left plenty of white spaces so that the values didn't get too clogged up. On the 25th of August, I went to a little place called the Carey Arms, which is in Babbacombe, Devon. And it's a little restaurant where I could sit outside and I could paint the cliffs, and there was a little house. I actually took some artistic liberty because this house was actually further to the left, but I struggled with this one. I initially started to put in a paddle border that I saw there, and it just didn't go to plan, but it was a beautiful day and I had a really nice experience. I always think that every experience that you have with painting, even if it's a bad experience, is a good experience because you're going to learn things, and hopefully your future paintings will benefit from that. About a week later, on the 31st of August, I bribed my daughter to come painting with me, and this is of a clock tower in Newton Abbot in Devon. And some of the things that I really loved about this composition, besides the clock tower, were the way that these trees sort of pointed towards it, led you towards the clock tower, and the way they had the hanging baskets of flowers underneath. And I liked the power lines going in front of it. So I had a lot of fun with this one. And again, it's an extra special memory because my daughter was there with me. A few days later, I was in Ilsington in Dartmoor National Park, and I only had an hour to paint. So I loved the way that this tree looked and the way it was rustling in the wind, and it had this little white bench below it. So I did a very quick 1-hour sketch that I was wholly unhappy with. I actually overworked the paper a little bit, so there's an area here. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but I was really disappointed with this, and so I was completely surprised that this was one of the more popular videos that I've made. But I learned a lot more about painting trees on a small format from doing this painting. A couple days later, on the 6th of September, I did another little painting, and this is also in Ilsington. And this is a view of their church and a little cottage, and I loved all of the flowers in front of it. Again, as I look at these paintings, I feel that I wish that I could put more vibrancy on them. So I think in future tiny paintings, I might explore bringing a tiny gouache palette just for little pops of color. But I also like to use masking fluid to just mask those areas and then come in later. This is one of my favorite ones. It wasn't hugely popular online, but I just had a great experience, and I love all of the architectural elements that I was able to include in this one. And then a few weeks later, I made a big mistake. I had gone to the dentist in Exeter, and I wanted to do a painting. The sun was setting earlier in the day, so it got really cold. And I didn't realize until halfway through the painting that I had painted on the wrong side of the paper. So we have to turn the sketchbook around to really appreciate this one. Again, with this one, there were some struggles and some unexpected successes. So I struggled really with the perspective of this row of buildings here that's leading to the little watchtower of this Norman castle. But the bunting that was hanging across really went down easily, and that was a bit of a surprise. So it's always really interesting when you go out. Sometimes the things that you think are going to be the easiest end up being the most challenging, and vice versa. But even though it's on the wrong side of the page, this is one of my favorite paintings as well. A few days later, I wanted to do a painting and I couldn't find a good location. So I just drove around randomly and I found this little spot outside of a place called Bickley Mill Inn. And I loved the way that these trees were rustling, and I loved the way that there were lots of different layered green colors. And so that was a challenge that I wanted to tackle. I don't think I was that successful at it, but it again was a good memory and a good learning experience. I was really happy with the tree trunk. I don't know if you can see the detail there, but my memory was that the greens of the grasses were a lot brighter. And then a week after that, on the 14th of October 2022, I went back up to our little secret garden by the tiny house and I painted the view. And this one again was a struggle. In fact, I was struggling a lot more with the landscapes than I was with the architecture. I found them a lot more challenging on this small format, especially when there were lots of different values. I like this one a lot more now looking at it than I did at the time. But these hills are actually a lot more slopey than I drew them. And this is a view that I've come back to and I've painted a few times since then. The next day, I went up to Whitcomb-in-the-Moor in Dartmoor, and it was a really windy, rustly day. It was super cold, and I sat at an outside bench at Cafe in the Green, which is a little restaurant up there. I loved this tree and the buildings in the distance. So this one is more or less a tree study with some buildings in the background. And then on the 25th of October, I think I was visiting my printer to get some things printed, some prints or something. And this is in Totnes. So I was waiting for him, or I can't remember exactly. But I found this little view in the town and I really loved it. And I think I painted this one across 2 days. So I did the drawing one day and then I went back the second day just to put in the watercolor. But I really love this painting, and this is one of my favorite ones in the sketchbook. About a week later, on the 3rd of November 2022, I went down to Plymouth, and along the waterfront, you could see this distant view of Drake Island. And this was the first time I met my friend Sunny, and we've met and painted a lot since then, but this was our anniversary painting, and I just had such a beautiful day. One thing that I really love about this is all of the different layers of blues and violets and greens that I was able to get into the sky and the water. About a week later, on the 16th of November, we're back in Totnes, and this time I was definitely waiting for the printer. And I had planned to take my little dog Poppy for a walk, but it started chucking down rain. So I actually painted this one in my car through the windscreen, with a really disappointed Poppy sitting next to me because we didn't get our walk. But the painting came together really quickly, and it's a lovely memory. About a month later, I hadn't done a tiny painting in a while. I can't remember what I was doing. I think I started posting on YouTube at that time, and I was making a watercolor tips series, which was keeping me really busy. But I always like to do a painting on the winter and the summer solstice. And so this was my winter solstice painting. And this is on a hill in Devon. And I just love this stand of trees with the hills in the distance. A few days later, on the 29th of December, this was my final tiny painting of 2022. And I met with Sunny again, and we went to the moors, and we were completely rained out. So I actually started this in the moors, but I finished it at home. We fled when it started raining, and we finished the paintings around my coffee table in my living room. So the painting's a little bit blurrier and lacks some of the definition, but that was because the paper was just so wet, and I really struggled with it. But it's, again, a really happy memory, and I actually quite like this one. Another month went by, and this brings us into the 25th of January 2023. I hadn't done a tiny painting in a while, but I met with Sunny again, and we met at a place called Coombe Cellars, which is in Devon, and it's along the estuary. And I love this little cottage with the little fishing boats and the outbuildings and the winter trees. And again, this is one of those where I'm really happy with the layers of blues and greens that I was able to get. It's a real mood. I think it definitely captures the mood of the day. On the 11th of February, I was actually being filmed for an arts channel in Turkey, and they had a filming crew come out, and they wanted me to do a tiny painting. So I took them to Ness Cove Beach in Shalden, and I whipped this one out in about an hour. I've done lots of paintings of this same scene before, and I'm pretty pleased with this one. I'll link the longer video that they made in the description if anybody's interested. I had permission from them to host it on my channel for a while, but then once they put it up on theirs, it wasn't allowed to be up on mine anymore. I think mostly because the music that they used was copyrighted. But it's a lovely little video that they made. On the 18th of March, I took my supplies again, and I was just determined to do a tiny painting. I hadn't done one for over a month. And so I went to this little park in Ogwell, and I loved the stone wall, and I loved the way these branches were hanging over it. In fact, there's a longer video that I made about this one. It's just an ASMR video if you want to get a better sense of the scenery and the day and the process of painting. But I really like this painting as well. Again, challenging myself to do just landscapes without any architecture, I think always is a good thing to do because it takes me out of my comfort zone and I learn and grow. On the 9th of March, I painted this little medieval house in Exeter. I think if I were to go back, I would make it smaller. It's a little bit too large for me. I think it doesn't really fit the frame. It kind of bursts out of it, and I should have put some more of these surrounding elements in it. But it was a lot of fun, and I painted this one again from the back of my car. I had the hatchback open and just sat there and painted. And there's a lovely little bookstore here, and I went in afterwards and got a few books. It's actually a free bookstore, but you can make donations, which of course I did. This one is a lovely memory because I was invited to paint at Blenheim Palace. And so on the 18th of April, I packed up all of my art gear and I went. And there is a longer video about that as well if you're interested. This is Blenheim Palace in the distance, and this is a lovely stone bridge that leads to the palace with this lake in front of it. And I was sitting right next to a tree called the Harry Potter tree, which is one of the trees that they used in the filming of the Harry Potter movie. So this was just a wonderful memory all the way around. And I'm pretty happy with it. I think I overdid it a bit with the water, and one thing that I really learned with watercolor in general is once you overdo it, it's really hard to backpedal. So if I could do this one again, I would want the water to be a little bit stronger, but otherwise I'm pleased with it. On the 26th of April, I met with Sunny again, and I took her to one of my favorite little villages in Dartmoor National Park. It's called Lustley. I painted there again recently with my friend Joanne, and there's a longer video about that I'll also link. I've painted over 60 tiny paintings since my very first tiny painting, and of all of those, I think this one is in the top 5. Not just because the day was idyllic and the scenery was beautiful, but I really loved the treatment of this thatched cottage. And a month later, on the 20th of May, I went to a nearby hill, and the field was just awash in beautiful yellow flowers, and there was this white bush that was in full bloom. And my dog was with me. It was just the most beautiful memory. I love the painting. I love the memory. I think this is probably one of my favorite landscapes that I've ever done because I was best able to represent all of the values accurately. And we were even invaded by a few cows. We had to take refuge for a little while, but I just love this painting so much. And then the final painting of this sketchbook was completed on the 30th of May, 2023. And this is painted at Bowood House, which is a beautiful stately home in the Cotswolds. And they invited me to come and paint there. So I did this little tiny painting on their grounds. And this is a little folly that you could see across the lake. And then the next day I did a more detailed ink drawing of Bowood House itself. But I really enjoyed this experience and enjoyed this painting as well. One of the things that I really love about painting outside is that you remember every single detail with all of your senses. I remember that I painted this at the end of the day. Most of the crowd had gone home. There was a little bit of a chill in the air, and I was spread out on my picnic blanket, laboriously mixing all of these different greens in the distance. And then afterwards I went and I had a lovely dinner. I just remember every single thing about this day purely because of this painting. And that's why I think that everybody should really try getting out and painting. This little sketchbook changed everything about my life because it not only helped me build a following online, but it also helped me really hone in on the fact that I love painting with ink and watercolor. And I really love painting on a tiny scale. Just like everybody else who grew up at the same time that I did, we were taught that bigger is better in art school. And it was really through doing this sketchbook that I learned that beautiful art can come in all sizes. So it's really important not to pigeonhole yourself. Explore different sizes. Go outside and paint because you're going to see the world differently. You're going to notice colors that you're not going to notice from a photograph. It was through completing all of the paintings in this little sketchbook that I really became a better artist. And when I look through it, I can see the evolution from the beginning to the end in my growth at being able to convey the things that I wanted to convey. This little sketchbook changed my life, and if you go outside and paint, it just might change your life too. So I hope you enjoyed this little tour. I hope it's inspired you to go outside and paint and maybe even try tiny painting. One thing that I really love about tiny painting is that you don't need a lot of supplies, so you can just literally put a few things in your backpack or your purse, and you don't need a lot of space or even a lot of time. So you can actually, with very few items, create a lovely little painting that is also a memory, and perhaps even an heirloom. I have thought someday of some grandchild or great-grandchild discovering and cherishing this and maybe even being inspired. So I hope this inspires you as well. I hope you all have a beautiful day with many happy painting adventures of your own.